All right. So hello everyone. One of the most difficult parts of teaching is trying to encourage students to, you know, build more comprehensively. And one of the key distinctions that I think is very helpful for many, even intermediate and advanced debaters out there is acknowledging how they are weighing their argument, right? It's kind of counterintuitive because, if you think that you need to build a lot more and be very comprehensive, then shouldn't you just find many, many reasons and then just keep on building and building and building? But usually, in my opinion, it is almost always the underlying weighing that drives an argument, right? Because you clarify what are the, what is the reason why it is meaningful, why is it important, right? And it is usually from there that you come up with a very clear mechanism to weighing link within the argument so that you are able to definitively prove why it is important in the round. So not just important for the sake of the weighing, right? And that it's connected, but it's important relative to other things in a round. So when we talk about the concept of weighing, right? You could weigh many things. You could weigh certain characterizations to be more likely than others. You could weigh a certain principle to be more inherent than something else. Or you could weigh a certain context to be more likely than something else. Or you could weigh any detail in an argument versus any detail of other teams in a round. And that could also include all the arguments that you're doing. But what I want to do today is to break away from this this obsession of just trying to weigh in general, but just try and focus on what we can control. And what we can control right now is the weighing that we do within an argument. And so I want to teach two things. I want to teach independent weighing, which is a very, very good structure, a very basic fundamental structure, which is a very good building block for you to be able to, discipline yourself in focusing on a weighing metric so that you could prove an argument. And then I will introduce a very relatively more advanced structure, which I think should be done very, very, very rarely, simply because it's very, very difficult to actually employ in a particular round. And the only reason why I am presenting it is not to show that, oh, it's such a good argument, it's such a brilliant argument. I mean, I do love the argument, it's quite nice. What I am intending to do is I just want to show the progression of how weighing can be more and more integrated with the specific explanations that you make in an argument, so that it doesn't seem like it's a completely separate thing, but it could be one and simultaneous with what you are arguing. So let's do this, right? So there are two examples. I'm gonna explain it along the way, because I just really like the examples, and it's been a very effective function of teaching that I've been doing for a lot of the students that have seen this lecture over the past months. So independent weighing is usually typically characterized by the following structure: that you will have a content to prove the argument. You will have some weighing after the proof of this particular argument, or you could do the weighing in the beginning, whatever you want, but it is before or after, it is not with the argument. And so you will conclude the weighing afterwards. So one example is, if I thought of in the motion, this house would permanently remove the ability of soldiers to feel fear. And I'm anticipating, right? I need this argument to be very, very strong. So my weighing would be, to the extent that wars may be engaged for just or unjust reasons, it is important that soldiers follow orders well, because this is the most approximate obligation that they have. So I think it's a very nice preemption. It's a very nice weighing of the argument, because you anticipate opposition might say, no, if you take away fear, that'll be more devastating. They're gonna make wars more inhumane and more worse. But you're gonna say, no, I don't know whether the war is always gonna be just or unjust. But I do know that a soldier has the clearest obligation to follow orders well. So if I can demonstrate that fear makes soldiers less effective at following orders, then we will win this debate. Now, there are 3 reasons as to how fear makes soldiers less effective at following orders. So, this is a common theme that I usually make in my videos. You want to, whenever you're constructing reasons for a particular claim, usually you don't want to make it too difficult on you, right? Just follow a linear structure, a parallel structure. Usually the brainstorming becomes a little bit easier when you get more practice in trying to build more and more of these reasons. Like, for example, I would say, 1, fear encourages self-preservation, so they are less likely to commit to fights. Number 2, fear is incapacitating and overwhelming. It makes soldiers more hesitant. And number 3, fear makes soldiers more doubtful and less confident in the orders of their superiors. So notice the relationship, the independent relationship, the relative independence of each and every claim is what I'm trying to say. That number 1, fear encourages self-preservation. So it's my life over others. Number 2, fear is incapacitating and overwhelming. So it's like, oh, I am prioritizing my decision making rather than considering other options. So I am more hesitant to follow any order given by someone else. But not just any order or any order from any comrade, but it is also the fact that it's not about my life over others or my decision and my ability to follow that decision, but it's also my doubt against my superiors because I distrust them. I feel that they are endangering my life and the lives of other people. And so, at least, even if this might be somewhat related, I hope you understand that the way that we have argued it, the way that we have built it, is built in a specific way that tries to be as independent as possible. So, it doesn't matter if we make it too independent, right? As long as we're trying to do our best, our due diligence to try and prove the argument, at least for the purposes of this lecture, what we're doing is, yeah, you know what? I'm proving that fear makes soldiers less effective at following orders. Here's the weighing again. That's why the weighing is very powerful. It preempts, it also functions as a response, but all has to still respond to my fear argument. And they can't just respond in general. They have to respond to, like, the weighing, right? That's a very, very strong part of this argument. So, this is not a bad argument, by the way, even though it might seem like I'm gonna eventually, like, say that it's not the most optimal way. But what I do want you to understand is that it's a very, very good fundamental structure, right? You prove a certain claim, you weigh it out, you use that as a preemption, however you need to, and that is a well-directed argument. You've directed it through the weighing, and then you can make the conclusion that, yeah, you know what? When soldiers are fearful, they fail their obligation as soldiers, to their fellow soldiers, to innocent civilians, and to their country. Now, I want you to note that, damn, this stuff seems to be like it just came out of nowhere, but it didn't really come out of nowhere, didn't it? Right? I could explain all of this stuff. I could improve the argument whenever I need to, that, yeah, when I preserve my own life over others, I am endangering fellow soldiers. When I am focusing on my own decision making, I am endangering other innocent civilians. And when I don't follow my superiors, who otherwise are, more knowledgeable, or, you could give all the characterizations you want, but because they are trusted with that position and they're following the orders of, the president and all of those other individuals that represent democracy in society, whatever, right? At least it's relatively more clear that they're violating an obligation of the hierarchy of command and thereby their country. And so, if they fail in the operation, this all might be very, very bad. That's why fear creates more harm than good. And that's why the argument still stands that they need to follow orders well. Now, of course, I want you to understand that this is not a perfect argument. Like, no argument's perfect. Op can still respond by explaining that, no, we have an obligation to follow our conscience. And that is more important than our obligation to follow orders. But notice that alone is not enough to really just win them the round by just saying that obligation for conscience is important, right? Because it still has to be weighed against these underlying obligations. And now, if you really think about it, did we really, really, really explain this to be uniquely part of the argument? And that is really the challenge, right? That's really the challenge, right? When you separate the weighing from the argument or from the content of that argument, now the relationship of the particular obligations that you thought were very, very important, now it gets reduced, or quote unquote reduced, because you've intentionally designed it that way, reduced towards the function of following orders well. That is its own pro and con, by the way. That if you have focused on following orders well, you've doubled down on that, that is very, very good. Even if this claim, like the claim I'm highlighting right now, could mean many other things are being violated, right? It could be weighed in many other ways. I'm saying, no, for this argument, this is our weighing. I'm focusing on that. That's the purpose of this argument. That's its own self-imposed limitation. It makes it clear what the argument is, but I want you to notice that that is, right? You can't implicitly intuit that there are other things that are being argued that you haven't actually said. And so that's why it's very important to acknowledge those limitations whenever you build an argument like this. And here is where I want you to understand that if you want to improve your argument, right? You always want to acknowledge how applicable is my weighing really to the argument, right? Because opposition could say that, you know what, following orders well, it's really reminiscent of an obligation to, we have an obligation to do what is right. Because that is what orders and their purposes are for. And so now it's like, okay, if I could follow my conscience, then I am following the spirit of what it means to follow orders well. So now it's like, now you have reached a level of complexity where you need to understand what the weighing actually is doing in a particular argument. And here is where it becomes a little bit more explicit. So if you want to make it more explicit, and that might help you in an argument, and usually it will, here's the integrated weighing structure that I'm trying to encourage, or at least I'm trying to help introduce for you to understand how arguments can improve and the progression by which, like, they really become very tied with one another, so it becomes very powerful. It's a very, very nice structure that I think really applies for, like, case building, world schools, or if you can, in an actual British parliamentary debate, even though it's very difficult in 15 minutes, if you want to double down on a particular, like, extension, this is the way to go, because it makes the argument very comprehensive. You have many win conditions that are associated with every weighing that you do, and that's how you can win eventually. So let's do it. So the structure basically is, rather than content leading to the weighing and then the conclusion, you would say content weighing, content weighing, content weighing. If my argument was in the motion, sorry, let me just open this a bit. If the argument was that TRCs create the conditions of stable governance, right? And then I could say, why is stable governance important? Stable governance is important because it's the precondition for economic investment. Stable government is important because it allows us to have a democracy. Stable government is important so that we can have trust in the government. You can give all those reasons that you want, and then you're like, here's how we get stable government. 3 reasons, whatever. Now it sounds like, well, why did you even go through the process of proving why stable government is important in the first place? You could just spam whatever you needed to, and it doesn't really function that much. It doesn't, like, gel well with the rest of the argument because it just sounds like a very standing claim that's just hanging, right? And so here, what I encourage you to do is understand, well, what are the underlying components of stable governance? What are the underlying components of TRCs, which is the motion, right? TRCs in post-conflict states. And how can we connect it with one another? And this is what I'm trying to do. I will first identify the mechanisms underlying a TRC, such as appointing a fact-finding commission, offering amnesty to war criminals, or empowering local judges through an elder council in a local justice system. And then I'm going to be like, now I'm guided by stable governance. How does this specific mechanism create the condition of stable government compared to opposition? And now I'm going to be like, okay, now I know what to do in the argument. Number one, the process of a fact-finding commission inherently brings in multiple stakeholders to collaborate with one another. And the weighing for this argument, or the weighing for this mechanism is, it is important to bring in a diversity of stakeholders to avoid historical revisionism in a very controlled platform, because otherwise, this revisionism, this indoctrination, or this misinformation would have otherwise happened if they relied on their closed circles and people, didn't understand the underlying facts of the genocide, the facts of what happened in the conflict. And so that is why you have, you could all argue why that's bad in opposition, but it's still going to be unstable. You don't have to go too deep into that, as long as you've explained at this point that, yeah, you know what? Opposition has no social cohesion as a consequence of the disagreement on the basic facts. But number two, it's not only about the facts, it's about we need to offer amnesty to war criminals because we want to make them more likely to cooperate with the process of reconstructing the state. Why is this important? It's important to get war criminals and their cronies to cooperate because they would have otherwise engaged in military coups and violence. And again, we have specified that it's not only about social cohesion, but about cooperation with past administrations and political parties and those that are sympathetic with them. And at number three, TRCs concentrate resources in building community justice systems to empower local judges and elder councils. And the underlying weighing for this argument is very simple. It is to build an independent and trusted local court system that builds on its own resources, builds on its own witness testimonies to compete against the encroachment from international court systems, which would have otherwise been distrusted. And again, each and every one of these reasons contributes to a stable government that we have a strong understanding of the facts, that we do this together, and that we also do this in the process of cooperating with the past administration, and we also do this in the means of developing our local system, all part of stable government. Again, it's not only one part, right? Notice how this mutually reinforces one another. That is part of the design of this argument, right? Remember a while ago, when we designed the argument as content, and then the weighing, it sounds as if the weighing is, it's just the final end all be all. You can preempt it very well. You can do as much as you want, but it's only limited insofar as, all these reasons, work together to prove that weighing, right? But now, because you have made the weighing as independent or integrated, like independent from the conclusion, but also independent from each other, but also integrated with the mechanism that it is created with in the argument, it allows you to provide many win conditions in it. Whenever I teach this to students, I also am quite honest about the fact that, well, doesn't this just sound like we're making 3 different arguments? Well, my answer is maybe, but I hope you understand that arguments are never just about just different impacts and we just list as many as we can. Notice that if we were to make a different argument on, we'll have local justice, you could still elaborate more on distrust from the international court system, and that why it's more unifying if we have a local elder court system that is empowered in our model. But the inherent focus on justice in that argument, right, is a very different focus compared to stable government, right, which is our ability to cooperate, our ability to unify under a government and reconstruct the state. So now it's like, oh yeah, you know what, justice here is for reconstruction. Reconstruction and cooperation here is not only for empathy, which could you also argue, but it's also your ability to cooperate together in this particular situation too. So that's quite nice. The bottom line of this particular brief video is just that whenever you do weighing, you want to be very intentional, right? You want to be intentional with what its function is in an argument. You want to be very disciplined in tying your argument with that weighing, and not just weighing things in general that, people are vulnerable, this is the most important thing, we want stable government, etc., etc. Because you could do that, but it might be a waste of time and a waste of effort for you. Because a lot of people will just agree with those very highfalutin and vague weighing mechanisms that you might provide. But it is only when you tie it with your argument, which is the thing that will likely be contested in the first place, right? Wherein you really elucidate how your weighing is mutually exclusive, and that is where you prompt a response from the opposition or from the other team. And that's a very, very difficult skill that you will eventually end up learning more and more about, which is the fun part about this exercise. Okay? All right. That's pretty much it. Thank you, and have a great day.